Welcome back to 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Brian,
I'm Nick.
and today we are here to break down the Legendary's Monsterverse and all the Godzilla films and talk about the good things, a lot of the bad things,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we're going to fix the most recent installment, Godzilla vs. Kong, in order to properly segue into the sequel, Godzilla and Kong. So we're going to dive into the first installment, Godzilla 2014. You watched this recently. What did you love about this movie?
Oh, honestly, most of it. The first thing I liked, I gotta say, the intro credits were great. Setting up the the world as why Godzilla is there. The nuclear testing that they did back in the wars. I thought that was a really nice touch, and just the reel of the cast, and then they're redacting information all around it. I thought it was a really good setup for like the mystery behind everything. People don't yet know what is actually going on, and for us it's also a big mystery. So it felt, I don't know, it just felt really solid. It was tense at the same time, and I thought it was a very good way to reintroduce the character or to introduce the character to new audiences.
Right.
I watched the original Godzilla, I'd say a year or two ago, and I got the same feeling from that intro from the original movie. It's kind of scary. It's very much the implications of what war has done to the world and like the repercussions of it. So I thought it was really well done. Obviously, seeing Godzilla reiterated for 2014 was amazing. And I think that movie still holds up in 2023.
Oh, for sure.
Um, like
Especially with the
it
4K remaster. Whew.
See, I wish I could have watched that one. It was very dark,
Yep.
but I still got the idea. And the story was simple and straightforward. We had some obviously really good performances.
Bryan Cranston.
Yeah, he did a great job. He was great. Aaron Taylor Johnson's performance, I actually really liked it. He was like a pretty stoic, military guy. It was good. And Ken Watanabe as Dr. Serizawa, I thought he was really good. He makes sense. He was a good fit. And I liked his reverence for the creatures, because he's like, these are things we can't control. We have to kind of let them do their thing, which we'll get into in the story. Mm-hmm. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a fun time. We didn't see the monsters too much, but I felt like the human characters didn't really drag the story. What about you?
The intro is one of my favorite things. Just the subtle change from the original Godzilla to, instead of it creating him, secretly wanting to destroy him. So like there's a massive, it's like, okay, the world is already there with one change of origin. What else is out there? Like they're trying to kill this thing secretly and trying to keep it under wraps. But the part after all this happens and like there's the ashes and then the Godzilla font comes up. Oh, it's one of my favorite things.
And it's again, it's that simplicity. It's nothing flashy.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's right there for you. And I totally agree with them changing just like ever so slightly the origins of Godzilla. Right. It's like he's already here. They're trying to destroy him with the nuclear weapons. He's not created by it.
So a little tidbit just to kick things off. A little secret Easter egg.
Yeah.
The Brodies, Bryan Cranston and Aaron Taylor Johnson, they're named after the two captains of the Orca in Jaws.
Oh.
And also the Orca, the ship that they ride to take out Jaws, is the name of the device they use in the sequel.
Right.
So I know he wanted to make this a Jaws feel. They didn't want to show the monsters too much, but he named the characters specifically after those two, captains on the ship hunting Jaws.
That's really cool. Yeah. I didn't realize that. Brian fact.
Well, internet fact, but I added
internet fact. Brought to you by Brian.
Yeah. So the one thing I would change about this movie, but it would kind of change the whole aspect of how it's done. I wouldn't have killed Bryan Cranston. Yeah. He was the heart and soul of the first quarter of this movie. And the tension and like the scene where his wife dies is so heartbreaking. And you feel everything like towards him. It's just like, man, he's killing this role.
And he had a good story arc. He was compelled. He was obligated to find the truth, and it essentially drove his family apart.
Yeah.
And he was redeemed eventually but that redemption was obviously cut short because he died.
Right. Because I found like his son didn't care as much about this stuff. So like transferring the role to him, it didn't really have the same weight as like how much he wants to be invested. Like I feel like when he met Ken Watanabe in that thing and he was in the cellar giving the performance of his life,
Yep.
it was one of the greatest scenes. But it's just like I feel like if he became part of Monarch and was like to go into the next movie and he developed the Orca because he was studying bioacoustics and all that other stuff,
Yep.
and him and Ken Watanabe would have carried that movie in order to like they would have had this headbutting thing of like Ken probably would have shifted his mindset into like he didn't want to destroy any of the monsters, he just wanted to find out who covered up all this stuff and like something's happening that they're hiding, right?
Yeah.
So I just think like the transferring to the son, while his story was like good, we're just using him to follow the monsters around. It didn't have the same weight as Bryan Cranston's. Like he was the most compelling human character, and like he had such a drive because they promoted it as Bryan Cranston versus Godzilla. The audience was like, "Oh my god, he's gone!" And even Bryan Cranston in an interview said it was such a fun movie to shoot, but he did not believe his character should have died. He said he should have kept going forward. And I totally agree, but that would have changed the whole point of the movie. But I think him and Ken should have been carrying this franchise.
Yeah, because when you get into the second movie, when you get into King of the Monsters, it's like, oh, we're still doing that whole bioacoustics thing, but it's not Bryan Cranston doing it. It's like, where did this info come from?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it doesn't matter.
And we'll get into that because there's a sole reason why those characters are there, and we'll get in when we talk about the second movie. Moving on to Aaron Taylor Johnson goes to break him out of jail, and they're going to back to their house. It's so interesting. It's like everything is quarantined, but like when he takes his mask off and realizes that it's all clean air. It's just like he knew it, this whole time. But there was an Easter egg. I don't know if you noticed in probably your version because it was so dark. But when they were in their house and he was looking through his photos and stuff, it pans across a fish tank.
Yes.
It said Mothra on it.
Yes. Yeah. And there was the little cocoon in there. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah. The scene where they first get into the quarantined nuclear area structure, when they first see the cocoon, as you would call it, of the new monster. And it's just like the way they did that, like the power of the EMP is such a cool ability for this monster, and it creates such a different dynamic. But you totally believe it because like these monsters are like, they're outworldly, so they can give them whatever power they want. But it was such a neat thing because tech is such a forward prospect in today's world. It's just like if you shut that down, we're totally useless, and we need Godzilla to save us, which is basically the whole point of going into the why Aaron Taylor Johnson's character is needed, because he's a bomb diffuser and he works with the originals where you have to program them by hand.
That this movie was great at illustrating to us that humans are wildly dependent on technology or electricity in general to be as capable as we are in a modern setting. Having that reliance on Godzilla to defend from the Muto, I thought was so cool. Because it's like, oh, we're toast.
Yeah.
Because that EMP just fries everything. Yeah. It was so neat.
And then to discover there was two of them.
Yes.
Crazy. Yep. Another thing I want to point out, because we're going to get into it later, is when they first bring in Monarch, Ken Watanabe and his sidekick, Sally Hawkins. I don't think she was needed. She's just like someone who just has to say things so Serizawa can like have someone to talk to, I guess. Because like he could have found out all this information. Yeah, she was just expedition. But like when they entered this one cave and they see the bones.
Yes.
So in a comic prequel comic, or like the storybook, the actual movie novel, that's a pre-Godzilla skeleton. That's like an earlier,
Ooh, like a proto-Godzilla. Yeah. That's neat.
Before the one we know. It's like, because they've been around forever, right? And that's when we get into the Middle Earth stuff. But that's the bones of Dagon.
Oh, okay.
So that's a subtle thing. It's like, oh my god, there was like, these bones are massive. It's like, this looks like a creature, and there was like, you could tell they had the dorsal fins, right? Some of the parts, but it's like this thing was huge. So there's clearly been other creatures before this that have come and gone.
Yeah.
But going into, I think one of the best. There's a lot of great moments in this movie, but let's start with Godzilla's first entrance. This whole scene was absolute perfection. I mean, your version was darker, but the 4K remaster just did this to perfection. Like you saw the dog barking, and then the little girl. There's always a little girl who notices something, and her parents don't care. They don't pay attention, but it's hilarious. The tsunami coming in, you see the water come up and everybody's running. It's crazy. There's like massive waves. And it's like, they don't show that for the rest of the movies. The impact he has when he rises from the water, the water levels rise. Insane.
Yes.
And then like when the army men shoot off the flares and you hear like the subtle like groan in his voice.
Yep.
And like it pans across how big he is and you see the scales. They find all these creatures.
Yep. Because that was like his like thigh that you see.
Yeah,
I think,
and you
right?
saw his hand.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, okay. He is massive.
Yeah. And then it cuts to Aaron Taylor Johnson again, and then the train lights come back on because the Muto just used the EMP and everything was down, and he was comforting that little kid, which was a nice moment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then it turns back on. They're heading towards this Muto, and then he breaks the train tracks, and there's chaos, and it pans up, and there's like explosions everywhere, and it goes inside the airport, and you see this bomb go off, and it lights up. This foot comes down, Godzilla's foot. It rises up, and like he takes this deep breath in, and he does this roar, and it's one of the greatest roars of all time. And even if you haven't seen Godzilla, I think you know exactly this roar. You know, it's so iconic.
Exactly.
But the biggest pain in the rear about this movie
Tell me.
is they cut it off right after that.
Yeah.
And I think the fault of this movie is they do it too many times. Because
Yeah.
if they would have given us maybe 2 more minutes instead of cutting to Los Angeles where Brody's family lives and the kids watching it on TV, if they would have given us 2 minutes of that fight and then have the Muto fly off, that would have given me satisfaction because Godzilla doesn't show up for a long time after that.
Right.
So I think instead of cutting it right after the roar, which was like, everybody was like, oh my God, it's because if you think about it, it was 45 minutes into this film. And we finally witnessed him, and they chop us off. Oh, it hurts so bad. But you can kind of accept it because you know it's going forward.
Right.
But then we get into the middle part of the movie with the whole them wanting to move nukes because they're trying to draw these. They find out these creatures are attracted to radioactive, like radiation. So they want to move these nukes by train. So then the Mutos are kind of hunting that. And that's where Aaron Taylor Johnson's Brody comes in, where he's kind of following along, trying to get back home, and uses the army as a way to get there.
The whole middle section of the movie, you're right. It's very much like monsterless.
Yeah, because you see tidbits. You see the Muto quite a bit.
We see it a couple times. We see the male and the female, and they're interacting. For me, I was actually like satisfied with the change to, again, the human perspective, even though we just saw like Godzilla for like 2 minutes. I don't know, not very long.
Because you see him and the army's following him, and they're like beside him with the boats, and he's like swimming in the water.
Yes.
That part's really cool, but that's really the only part you see of him.
Right. Did you feel when you watched that movie, did you like lose interest at all, not being with Godzilla as the main character?
Not so much, because I knew they were saving something, but I wish we would have got a little bit more in the middle of like maybe still following him. Because the Mutos, they're trying to set up this new species because no one knows what they are. So they're trying to develop, and like they also want to follow Aaron Taylor Johnson because he's really the only other main character. So that's why they pitted against him. But I think they could have used maybe one more extra scene, but then they would have cut us off anyway. So I think it was fine the way it was. We just having the Mutos kind of guide in the destruction of that. Yeah. But like, Godzilla, it's like he should have found them at some point before coming back to San Francisco.
Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of like moving around and not really them interacting again.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the Mutos went to that one bunker where they had a bunch of nuclear waste. And then...
Well, the female was following the train. She was trying to get the nuclear train to feed her babies.
Yes.
Which then we find out in that scene with the train and then falling off the train tracks that she is pregnant because she walks over and you see the eggs.
I liked how it was relatively simple. That was like to me, it was like a big plot point. Like, oh, there's a bunch of eggs now that Aaron Taylor Johnson has to deal with.
It's another part that I have written in my notes about it. It's a negative.
Okay.
But it's a negative after a positive. The scene where he shows up in San Francisco, Godzilla, and all the ships are there waiting for him, and then he swims up and he stops, and you think that's his back, but then it turns out to be his tail, and then he starts rising up, and all these ships are like everywhere, and it's like the scale was just crazy. And then like the whole thing of him fighting and like the misty like grayness, and like it's clearly it was raining, but it was like the tension and like he looked so good. But then it cut to Ken Watanabe. and he gives one of the greatest speeches,
Yep.
and he delivers the line, "Let them fight." And I
Yep.
think at that point, this movie made a big mistake because when he said that, it cut back to San Francisco in the middle of the city, and you see Elizabeth Olsen's character and then all the other people running, and you see the Muto flying across, and then you see Godzilla rise up from the buildings, and it's just like he's covered in water. They go to attack each other, and all the people are running, and then they shut the doors and they cut
Yep.
away from the action. Okay, this
Yep.
is the second time you're gonna blue ball us after one of the best lines in the film. It's like at that point you show us the fight.
That is literally the bell
Yeah, you
at the
show us the
boxing
fight.
ring.
I
Yeah,
understand you want to. It's easier to do special effects in the dark, but they looked incredible in the
they did.
middle of the day. It's like give
They
us like a
did.
couple minutes. Like
Yep.
you could cut us off again right away, leading back into, and then all of a sudden it's nighttime. But then it leads. I think they wanted to do this because it leads to one of the coolest scenes in the film when they jump out of the plane,
The
and
Halo
the
dive.
Halo dive
Yeah.
is one of the coolest shots. I have the movie poster on my wall of them falling
Yeah.
down, and the music. It's like that echoey like opera like tense thing, and then they have the
Right.
red flares going off for the smoke so they can see each other, but
They
then
see
they
each other.
they go
Yeah.
past Godzilla and the Mutas fighting, but it's like already nighttime-ish because of the storm, I guess. But I felt
Yep.
like we missed the tension was cut off because we're so ready for this fight because it had been an hour and 27 minutes already, and we're like, okay, let's just he's finally saying let them fight and we're about to get it, and we don't.
Yep.
So that's another negative to me where I think they could have give us at least a couple minutes back and forth of those two just brawling it out and then cut to the army men a little bit just to have our tensions because you're not going to show the main attraction of the film, which is the highlight of the film when he first uses his atomic blast yet. They're just going to
Right.
spar a little bit, bite each other
Yeah.
up, knock each other into some
Yep.
buildings. We just need a little taste because you didn't give it to us earlier.
Yep.
But then the army men come down. They're bringing the nuke into the lair of the Muto. And one of the coolest scenes, I think, is when the music goes silent, right? And Aaron Taylor Johnson's left, and
Yep.
you're in the middle of this Chinatown-looking area, and you have the
Yep.
lanterns hanging across, and there's so much smoke, and you see Godzilla's tail just,
Yep.
and it has that dong bell, like everything's quiet, and you hear like the
Yes.
dong, and his tail comes across, and he comes through the smoke, and he's all slow
Yep.
with it, and he gives off this roar,
Yep.
and it's one of the coolest shots of the film. And then they go at it, they start fighting.
And if I remember correctly, when he does the roar, they kind of like linger on him for maybe a second or two. And you kind of see him like sway a little bit. You see
Godzilla?
like,
Oh
yeah.
no, it's a long roar.
No,
It's like
it's a
a
long
good
roar.
7 seconds.
So sorry, I mean like once he's done and he has that kind of like bass growl.
Yeah.
Like they just hold on. Yeah. They just hold on him for like a couple more seconds and it's just so like it's so satisfying. You're like,
Yeah.
it's like that's what I wanted to see in his intro.
Yeah.
Instead of cutting it right away.
Yeah.
It's like just
They
but
let us see him in full, but it was still nighttime. But like you saw him,
yeah.
and that's
Yep.
when we get into the
That
action. Like he's getting, for the most part, he starts off strong, and then he gets kind of overwhelmed because there's two of them. There's one point I want to mention when he falls over. And Aaron Taylor Johnson is in the middle of the city, and they make that eye contact before the smoke goes over top of them. I think that's such a cool moment where like someone's
it is.
making direct a human the first time making real personal connection to him.
Yeah.
I think that was a cool moment because it kind of sets up the second movie a little bit.
Right.
But when Godzilla first, it's going to look different for you because it looks incredible in the 4K because they redid all the coloring. Because it happened in the second movie as well, but they start with the tail. The tail slaps on the ground and it goes vroom, 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 and like the buildup of energy, the sound of him, his spike, his atomic breath charging, and you're
Yep.
following up his back, and it's charging, and he takes a deep breath in and just lets it loose.
Uh-huh.
We've been waiting for that all movie, and I think it paid off so well. But the 4K remaster, dude, it was so blue. It was great.
Right.
Because it was
'Cause
gray
it's-
and white in the original.
It's like a hint of blue. You're like, I know it's blue, but it's like
it's just
not
gray
there.
white. They really dialed back because they took the muddy filter off the whole movie in the 4K, and they really contrasted the colors, and it's so blue. It's not as blue as the other two movies, but like you could tell they needed to fix that, and it was such a good moment. It's like, oh, I remember the crowd like going crazy. So getting back
Yeah.
to the fight, after he blasts him with the atomic breath, there's kind of like a moment where it cuts back to the army men kind of bit, and then it goes back to him fighting just the one with the wings because the other one's distracted by the bomb. And when there's a look Godzilla has as the Muto's flying towards him, and he has this like snarl he does in Godzilla versus Kong where it's like, okay, I'm so sick and tired of you. And he
Yep.
does the tail whip, but he sends this thing through a building. All the beams and everything just go like right through the Muto and he dies instantly. And it's like
Yep.
Godzilla's like, I'm so sick and tired of these things. And it's like, I'm ending you right now. Crushes it, but then the building falls on top of him. And it's like, Adria was like, man, he can't catch a break. It's like, nope, he can never. He's a win, and then
Right.
and the building falls on top of him, and he just needs to catch his breath again.
It's like a win and a loss at the
Yeah.
same time. It's like,
Because that's
sorry,
when
dude.
the scene where I mentioned where Godzilla looks at Aaron Taylor Johnson in the streets because the building fell on top of
Yeah.
him, and he's just like, you can tell he's absolutely exhausted because
Yes.
he hasn't fought anything and probably like he's just been
Exactly. Yeah.
he awakened into the bottom. He's been sleeping for probably decades or
Yep.
centuries, maybe.
Yeah, because there's been no other threat
No.
to pose to him. So yeah, he's been asleep.
So before we finish off this movie, the final scene I want to talk about is when Aaron Taylor Johnson has got the nuke on the boat, and he starts the boat and he starts to go away, and then the boat, all the power goes away, and you're like, uh-oh, the Muto
Yep.
is right, because the Muto's there because the army men's are fighting and whatever, but then he's about to get munched, and then all of a sudden the Muto stops, and you hear a crunch, and it pulls back,
Yep.
and Godzilla has him by the shoulder, pulls him back, takes his face, rips open his mouth. The beam
And
launches
atomic
up,
breath
atomic breaths right through the center of his body.
Oh, that was so
And
satisfying.
then his head pulls off, and Godzilla's holding him by the head, like because his body
Yep.
is separated. And he just throws that thing in the water and gives a big old roar.
Oh, so
And
good.
then he goes to sleep. He falls over
Yep.
on the thing, and he wakes up the next day. And that's where the movie ends. All the people all around him. And he wakes up and he goes off into the sea.
That whole everybody in San Francisco surrounding Godzilla,
Yeah.
to me, is just like this is the new idea of Godzilla. Godzilla isn't this thing that humanity created out of war. It's like this is our protector.
Yeah. And they even say that in the article. It says, or the news broadcast, it's like savior of our city, question mark.
Right. And it's just a great send off for the movie.
Some people don't agree, but I think it's the best one of the trilogy as an overall story. Because
I agree.
the humans, as we go into the next ones, are just I can't take any of them.
Nope.
These ones, at least, Bryan Cranston, Aaron Taylor Johnson, just a little, he's got the stoicness. He doesn't have a lot going, but he's still interesting enough. And like none of them are irritating to a point of like I can't stand any of you.
And their motivations aren't.
They're interesting. The story,
They're interesting, exactly. They're
because
compelling.
Legendary had to do this right because they failed the first time in 98. Even though I think it's a fun monster movie, I love that design because it made an amazing cartoon. But this was their win back in, and they had to make an amazing story, like script first.
Yep.
Whereas this next one, I feel like the studio, there's too much studio involvement in making films, and I can't stand it. So they hired Michael Dougherty to helm the next movie, and he is a massive Godzilla fan, and you can tell in this movie he's a massive Godzilla fan. He is being held back so hard by the studio, having to involve all of these characters. And to start this movie off, Godzilla King of the Monsters came out in 2019. The only reason this movie had human characters and the way they were portrayed is because Millie Bobby Brown was the hottest thing that was happening in the world at that time.
Right.
She's the only reason this
things, right?
this is the only, there was a family. It's the only reason because they wanted to have Warner Brothers was like, oh, we don't know if Godzilla can carry a movie. Why do you think people are coming to see a movie? They're like, oh, you know what's going to get him in here? Millie Bobby Brown. And it's like, at that point, they lost.
You're right. It's like, you're right. She will draw
other audiences that aren't monster fans.
Right. But I do want to see a monster movie.
Yeah. So they're like, oh my God, we got to have this actress. And then we got to fill it with stuff that makes sense. So they have to put a family in here and all this other dynamics. And it's just like, that's when the script went downhill.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. Godzilla 2014 had a family.
Yeah.
And each person had kind of motivations. Well, I'd say one main character of the family, Bryan Cranston, had motivations.
Yeah.
Ken Watanabe had motivations. Everybody else has to kind of go along with
Yeah,
those
they
things.
accent those two characters. There's two main
Exactly.
characters in the first movie, and when they kill
Yeah.
one, the new one rises, and there's still two mains.
Right. And now we get to King of the
There's
Monsters, and
27 main characters.
everybody's a main character, and it drags it down. And it's no fault of the actors. It's what was expected, I'm assuming, of the story by Warner, like
But
to
even the
get people
dialogue
in.
is atrocious.
Oh yeah, it's not. Well, right, because it's like, what do you talk about? What do you talk about when
Yeah.
giant monsters fight?
So for
Like
everyone who hasn't seen
nothing.
this movie is about a family who lost their son in the 2014 Godzilla attack in San Francisco.
Yep.
And the mother is a scientist who works for Monarch, and she creates a device called the Orca, which goes off what we talked about earlier about bioacoustics. It's a device that allows to send a signal to be able to talk to these monsters and make sure that they can control them.
Right.
And she wants to basically, it turns out later, she wants to, out of revenge for like her losing her son, she wants to set all these monsters free because they found out in San Francisco after the Titans came through, new life was born from the radiation, and then new plant life and everything. So she wants to reset. Basically, she wants to Thanos the entire planet, to have all these monsters be released and reset the population to what it's supposed to be, flourished with life.
Right.
And obviously the father, he doesn't agree because they're divorced. They went their separate ways because she went down a rabbit hole and he couldn't help her anymore dealing with the loss of their son.
Right.
So that's basically what the movie's about.
Yep.
Instead of the monsters,
so
it's about the people.
Yep.
And to open this movie up, they show that scene. And what I don't understand is, how did they lose the son at all when the mom had the daughter? What was the dad doing? Did they just like leave him in the house and they lose him? How did they lose the son?
I don't really know. That was interesting. Yeah, I was like, what happened?
But they had to give him some
just,
kind of moral, like, I lost the biggest thing in my life, you know? They had to give him something interesting.
I suppose, but it's almost like, why not? You don't have to lose a child to do that. Why not just like the destruction of the family in general?
Yeah.
Or like, I would say, if we were to just tweak the family dynamic there, the son doesn't have to die. The son could, or the family itself could have been torn apart in the aftermath because.
Or they could have used the villain properly.
Yeah.
And actually, instead of having the kids die, he could have held them hostage to have her make this orca for him to control the monsters.
Exactly.
Because he was totally underused. Like, his plot was so useless, and it was because she was turned into the villain. He was like a back villain, even though he was the main villain.
It was Charles Dance.
Yeah, Charles Dance is he's iconic.
An amazing villain. Yeah, he's a great villain.
So they could have done that a little bit and held the kids hostage, because like you wouldn't have to have the whole movie been like the dad been like, you can't change, we lost him, you can't bring him back, this won't change anything, and she's like, well, it doesn't matter. There's right. It's just an annoying conflict.
And I think their relationship, Emma and Mark, like the parents, they could have their tensions could have been brought up by their motivations to rescue the kids.
Yeah.
Emma could have been like, I'm going to create the orca to get the kids back. And Mark could have been like, there's got to be a different way.
Yeah.
Maybe we can infiltrate their base, find out where they are. Something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, don't do the Thanos thing.
Yeah.
It's like,
because it didn't really show him manipulate her in any way. So like, it seemed like it was her plan all along.
Exactly.
So he has no stake in the game other than just some army guys.
It really felt like I was really unsettled by her decision to go through with this. And Charles Dance's character as the villain almost seemed surprised as well.
Yeah.
He's like, whoa, this is your plan.
Yeah. At one point when she releases it, and he's like, long live the king or whatever. It's like, okay, I didn't plan for this.
Right.
But anyway.
Yeah. Continuing.
So let's segue into the good before we go back into the negative, because the monsters in this film look absolutely incredible.
Spectacular.
Another thing I think was missing from Godzilla vs. Kong, what they did so well, Michael Dougherty, the soundtrack for this film is amazing. All the monster themes are there. You can hear the music and everything, and it swells and it brings everything together, and it just has that like classic Godzilla feel. It
does. It really does. It feels classic, like 90s Godzilla.
Yeah.
When they're fighting, when they're interacting, because there's it's orchestral music, so it's not too cheesy, but like you still remember it from the old movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's epic. It's
Bear McCreary did it. It's amazing.
That makes sense.
He made it modern. He took the orchestra sound and then just added a little more like oomph to it, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It tied everything really nicely together.
The only thing I would say is that most of the time the monsters were covered in some kind of weather. Anytime they
Yes.
were fighting, it's like, well, it's a snowstorm. Oh, it's
Yeah.
cloudy or rainy. Oh, there's ash everywhere. There was never like a clear visual shot
No.
of them.
And they kind of rationalized it that, Ghidorah was not from Earth. He was
Yeah,
like another apex predator from another world. And he was able to, or that's what caused the changes in weather. His presence just did that.
right.
But you're right. I don't. I feel like it was the scenes were very muddied
Yeah,
by that. You didn't get to see all the scales, all
all
of
the glory.
the slashing and the glory.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't there. It was kind of missing. But yeah, you're right. They looked amazing.
The scene, let's pick apart the scenes, the monster scenes a little bit before we dive into the characters again.
Yeah.
The scene where we see Godzilla underwater and he's doing the intimidation display. It's
Yeah.
one of the coolest things I've ever seen in a Godzilla film.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
So they have this giant window in the front to look out for whatever reason. There's warnings and signs going off, and they're like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, Godzilla's approaching." And then like they start arming all their weapons to get ready, and then Mark's like, "No, no, no, we can't make him seem like we're about to attack him, or else." Which I don't understand why they do anyway, because he could kill him in an instant. So they open up this window, and it's pitch black out there. There's like muddied. You see some kind of like blue. Then all of a sudden you hear boom, boom, and then you see the fins glow, and it's just this
Yeah.
straight shot of Godzilla right in the middle of the frame, and it's like boom, boom, and it's like he does that a few times, and it cuts back to Mark, and you can see Godzilla's reflection in the glass, and you can see how close his face is, and it's like boom, boom,
Mhm.
and he's like, they shut all their weapons down and everything. So he's doing the intimidation display, and then all of a sudden he like fades back a little bit, and everything goes black, and everyone takes a big sigh. And it's like, okay, he's
Yep.
gone. And then all of a sudden, the whole place shakes, and he has like this roar, and it's thunder, and he like his spikes crackle again, and he like zooms around, and it's like he swims off. But it's like, listen, I'm in charge here. You
Uh-huh.
can't control me. I'm not afraid of you at all. I know you're
Yep.
here, but I'm going to find what's really the cause of my issues, and that leads into the
Exactly.
Antarctica scene with Ghidorah.
Yeah. You're right. Which yeah, it's kind of like a try to stay out of my way.
Yeah, just stay out of my way. And then we cut to Antarctica when Ghidorah gets released. I don't know what it is about humans. They like to just stand and watch things happen.
Yeah.
When there's the massive crater in Antarctica after he gets broken free from all the explosions, and
Yep.
like there's this cloud of electricity, and the humans are just like looking down, looking at him, and you can see the heads coming up, and they're just like, oh yeah, and then they finally see him, and he roars, and they're like, oh shit, and then they start running. What do you mean? You should have been running long before then. And then
Exactly.
he
If you see a
obliterates
giant
all of them.
hole, exactly. Yeah. I feel like a lot of those interactions, I'm like, those are silly.
Yeah,
We don't need them there. I would prefer we follow the humans. We're humans. We're gonna follow humans in a story.
see,
It's
I
natural
disagree
for
for
us.
these.
I know you do.
I'd rather have,
But
instead of us following the humans, I'd rather have us following the monsters, but like we're, as the humans in the story, follow the monsters in a way. Instead of having it always, the humans got to go somewhere that the monsters just happen to show up. It's like, how about we carry the story through following, like kind of how they did in the first movie a little bit, where they're always,
they have small roles to play.
yeah,
Small human roles, not huge.
you know,
Yes.
we're the humans following them instead of just like always just in perspective of humans.
So I agree with you. I agree with you in terms of humans being the passive, like, observers for these stories. Tie breaking changes to the story of the monsters.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that as much. We're in that same space. I don't need to see everybody stop and gawk at like
Yeah.
a giant hole with like dinosaur, like,
Because we could have
Ghidorah
seen
heads
that
coming up.
ourselves. Like they could have just
Exactly,
had the same shot with all the humans standing there. Because you lost half your army.
Exactly. Right.
And what
it's
are you
like, oh, where'd
shooting
get
these
more
things
army?
with guns for?
Exactly.
AK-47 rifles, and you're just,
Yeah.
it's clearly not doing anything, and you're still going to stand there. That's the one thing I
Exactly.
don't understand about when they make movies like this. The army makes absolutely no sense. Unless you're
Right.
going at them with like these massive missiles, like that one big
Right.
plane they have. But what are you doing with guns?
Have one scene to illustrate that the forces, the military force is not enough.
Well, they had that in the
And
first
that's it.
movie.
Exactly. Done.
Yeah,
you don't need,
to have them walk
again.
trying to shoot this thing with a bunch of AKs.
Exactly. Like we've already established that. It's like I'm sure that this new threat is impervious to your other stuff
Yeah.
if Godzilla is too. Don't try it.
Especially when all the army know what that monster is because they were inside Monarch's thing and they're telling them they're after Monster Zero, this ancient being. It's like this thing is an alien god. It's like it's not going to go down to
Right.
a little bullet.
Exactly.
But then
Yeah,
we
it's like
get the
don't
scene
waste it.
after Ghidorah's messing around, stomping all over the
Mhm.
place, destroying everything. That's when we cut to the main characters, Mark and Sarazawa, and all.
Mhm.
They're on the plane. Where this is the end for us. Ghidorah's about to finish us off, and then we hear the rumble, and then
Yeah.
the light shining through the ice cracks through.
Yeah.
Godzilla appears, does the roar, and it cuts to the wide shot of the two of them. Such
Yep.
a cool shot. It shows
It's
how
amazing.
massive Ghidorah is
Yep.
and how big Godzilla is. We know how big Godzilla is, but he looks tiny compared.
He does.
And then they just go
Yeah.
at each other. What I
Yep.
don't like about this film, they're always, whenever the monsters go, they always cut back to the humans and like their perspective in a way. And it kind of
Yep.
like, by the end, you're like, I'm sick of always cutting back to the humans' vision. It's like immediately. We
Right.
don't need to see it from down on the ground all the time because they're
No,
always
no.
stumbling around anyway. So it's like,
Give us like a low angled shot. Like I think they did it in the first movie a
yeah,
couple times where it was like a shakier cam or they're like zooming in and then you get like some splatter. I was
yeah,
like, fine, do that, but I don't need to see it exactly
yeah.
from the human's perspective.
Because they did it. It's not like I don't mind the human perspective, but it's when they cut away from
It,
the action, but you don't
yeah,
see what's happening. You just hear
yeah,
it.
exactly.
They do
Right.
that so much in this movie, and like a bunch of the stuff in the Antarctica fight was really well done. With like you've seen the monsters and like Godzilla's doing the atomic blast and Ghidorah dodging it. You see all that stuff,
Yep.
but they always cut back to the humans and like, okay, well the fight is way more interesting than what's going on in this plane. You know, they
Yeah.
never really. It's like sometimes they do it where you can see through the plane and the monsters are there, but when you're just going back to the perspective of like humans fumbling around, it's like it's not as interesting as what we've spent the last half hour building towards.
Show me a piece of cake
Yeah.
that's really tasty and then show me like a piece of bread.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to see that piece of bread. I
No.
want to go to the cake.
Yeah. And so I just want to go back to there's a scene when Mark shows up after Sarah's out, picks him up, and they show up at the base of Monarch and they have this round table and they have this massive display. They're at this long table and there's like 20 characters sitting there. They introduced us to 20 characters in like 5 minutes. I'm like, I'm already tired of all these characters. There's
Yep.
too many characters in this movie. It's like everyone needs to trying to be a leader. You have the army leader, the woman who's an army leader. You have
Yep.
the Dr. Chen. She's there. You have Sarazawa. You have Sally Hawkins. Yeah, she's still there at that point because they haven't made it to
She's still there.
Antarctica. Then you have
Yep.
Kyle Chandler, Mark, and you have um,
Bradley Whitford's character, right?
Thomas, the Thomas, the other
Oh, yeah, he's
he's
Sam.
Sam. You have
And then we
him,
have
and then you
Dr.
have Doctor
Stanley.
Rick Stan,
Yeah.
who I want to get into because I absolutely cannot stand this character. He's just a notification on screen. He's a
Yeah.
countdown guy. I don't need a countdown guy and a notification. He's totally useless, and it's played forth in the Rodan fight heavily, and I just can't stand it. When I've watched this movie a few times, and at one point I just said enough's enough, and I brought it onto my computer and I edited it myself. I cut out all the nonsense to make this movie even watchable, and I cut about 15 minutes off of it. And in the Rodan fight, Rodan looks incredible, by the way. This
Yeah.
whole scene and everything was perfect about it. And then he's chasing all the planes. Everything was good. But what I did, every time Rodan was doing something, it would cut right back to the main ship because they were getting closer to this storm, right? We can visually see that. And every time they're like, oh, 60 seconds till this. And he says another thing. He's like, 60 seconds. Then it cuts back to Rodan flying and doing all this stuff. Then he's like, 40 seconds. And it cuts back to the plane.
Right.
And it goes back to more danger. And they're like getting close. And it cuts back. He's like, 30 seconds. And it keeps
Yeah.
going back. And then he finally goes like, 10 seconds. I'm like, you're ruining the tension of this scene.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
cut
Let
all
it play
that
out.
garbage out because we can
Nice.
visually see how close they are to the storm, how close Rodan is getting, all the planes he's
Nice.
destroying, and this is the only one left. We don't need him to being
It-
the guy who is the countdown.
What I don't like when countdowns come up in movies is it actually the amount of time that they said?
Yeah.
They're like, is that 60 seconds?
No, it's
like,
not.
Right. So, I don't have to have them pretend it is. Like thinking of like impacts in movies. Like I'm going way off topic here for like 2 seconds.
Okay.
In Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire one,
The first movie or the second movie?
the first movie, when the Green Goblin's spikes impact at the end. I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen a 20-year-old movie,
Yeah.
but whatever.
I think people have. When the
I'm pretty
glider
sure
kills
people,
him, right?
when the glider kills him, they do that impact like 3 or 4 times,
Yeah.
and like time at that point is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're counting down anything. They're showing us the most important part. Same thing goes for this scene where we see visually how far the cloud is from our current view of like Rodan.
Hmm.
So it's like we don't need anybody to tell us the time.
No.
In fact, I'd rather not have that at all
Yeah.
because I want to see just the progression of it. I want to see that visual change over
Yeah.
time.
And like the way,
Um,
like you can remove, like it didn't take much to edit the scene at all. I cut
right,
down
just
all of his things, and each scene cut together perfectly, and it was a
oh, there you go.
seamless Rodan fight scene. And I was like, why did you have this guy at all? The scene flows
Right.
so much faster, and there's more visceral action because it's a constantly Rodan just messing stuff up instead of cutting back to the humans again. And then he
Right.
goes to fight Ghidorah, and it's just like, okay, we didn't need any of this extra nonsense. And he does it later when Godzilla goes into meltdown.
Yes.
It's
It's
so
like
annoying.
12 minutes,
Yeah.
6 minutes,
Yeah.
30
30
seconds.
seconds
Like,
till
come
he
on.
blows. I can't
Like,
stand
okay,
him.
it's like we see it visually
Yeah.
in like what like Godzilla's colors. Like
Yeah.
he's like blue, then he's got some red flickering,
Yeah.
and then he's like fully red. It's like, okay, he's melting down. Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And even in, like, anytime he talks, I'm just like, get this guy off the screen. Because when they go after, so the scene with Rodan, it finishes with Ghidorah putting him in the water, and then Ghidorah's chasing after the big army
Yes.
ship. And then Godzilla comes, swoops him out of the water. Another cool scene. You see it from the back.
Yes.
This is a perfect example of human perspective. You see it out of the back of the ship because the hatch is down because they saved
Yes.
another ship. You see it there, and then they're just fighting in the water, and it's great. And they launch
Yep.
the oxygen destroyer,
Yes.
and it blows them all up. And
Mhm.
Ghidorah rises because he's not made from oxygen, and he doesn't need it to
Right.
live. And then
Yep.
Godzilla rips his head off, and it's a good scene. But
It's a
then
great scene.
I don't know if you noticed, there was a cut I saw online of like a reaction shot when everything subsides, all the fish rise up from the water.
Yeah, yeah.
Someone in the theater was like, "That's a lot of fish," because it's a callback to the '98 Godzilla when they dump all that fish in Central Park, and he goes to eat it, and one of the guys goes, "Man, that's a lot of fish." I think
That is
it was Nick Totopoulos,
oh
Ferris Bueller's Day Off. What's his name?
yeah.
Yeah.
Matthew Broderick.
Matthew Broderick. He
Yeah.
goes, "Oh, that's a
Yeah.
lot of fish."
That's a lot of
So
fish.
it's a nice little callback. Michael Dougherty clearly has seen this movie, and it's a nice subtle callback to the old American Godzilla movie. But
That's really great.
it was
I like that.
funny. But then, like, so Ghidorah launches from the ocean, and they're like, "Okay, we just launched our best effort, and it's useless. But we've killed Godzilla. Our best
What
chance
we
of
gonna do?
yeah, what are we gonna do?" And then Ghidorah goes to the volcano, does his roar, and alerts every other monster.
Yes.
It's like because he's the alpha, so he's basically
Right.
the orca, and he signals all these monsters to come up and control them to destroy everything.
Yep.
So we cut to Monarch, and they're like, "We have to figure out where Godzilla is." And at this point, Mothra comes back,
Yes.
which we haven't mentioned yet, but Mothra's in the film at the beginning. Mothra
Yep.
comes back from the clouds,
Ugh.
breaks open the clouds. The music and her cry alone, and she's flapping her wings, and there's like magic happening, and like she's signaling down. She creates this funnel of her voice down into the depths of the ocean, and at that point, she's like, they figure out that she's calling to somebody, and so they tune in. I don't know how they tune in because he's in Middle Earth currently in his sanctuary. They hear his heartbeat again. They hear him respond.
Right.
And so they're like, "Hey, we got to go down there. How are we going to do this?" And he's like, "How many nukes, Marcos? How many nukes do you have?" And this was one of the times I'm like, "Okay, I'm on board with this human plot line. Let's do it. Let's go down there." And so, and then it cuts back to Rick, the guy we can't stand. He's like, "Oh, I knew it, man. There's tunnels everywhere, and they're going." And he's like, he's carrying.
Right. So this is that first introduction to like not really the first one, but it's a furthering of the Hollow Earth concept, which we get into in the next movie.
Where Godzilla, in order to travel around quicker, he has these tunnels, almost like if anyone's seen Finding Nemo, the scene with the turtles.
Yes.
Oh my god, why can't I remember the turtle's name?
Crush.
Crush. Yeah, Crush. They use the current to swim faster. So they
Exactly.
use these portals in order to travel between Hollow Earth and like different parts of the world.
Yep.
So they get this nuke and they take their sub and they get caught in this vortex and it takes them to the deep ends of the ocean, which is I assume is Hollow Earth,
I think it's
a version of, because they
a
say it's
version
Hollow
of
Earth,
it.
right? At some point
Yeah,
they
they
mention it,
do.
but it's like
Yeah.
this ancient Atlantic looking city,
Right.
and they're going through. And again, this is the part where I also edited a lot. As they're going through, instead of us visually taking in this environment, as dark as it
Which is
is,
really
it's a
cool.
really cool environment, and you can see a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff on the walls. They cut back to the humans again, and they're just Rick has a bunch of stupid comments he's making, and it's
Yep.
like I'd rather just visualize. So I cut all his commentary out, and I want to be in the
Fair.
moment and visualize this entire, because we never seen this before, you know?
Right. Yeah, it's a new environment. Let us get established into it.
Yeah,
Rather than jumping back.
yeah,
And we don't need really any commentary for that, because it's a brand new spot. I think when they're coming up into like the air pocket area,
because
sure, like
they're
sure,
using those drones because they can't go any further because of the radiation. So they use the drones,
exactly.
kind of thing, and then they spot him. They cut back to the humans, and it's like a nice, because Sarazawa realizes that he has to be the one to go. So he
Right.
puts the suit on, and everybody has, is emotional. And it's like, they're sending him off, and he gets into this tanker, and it's one of the best sequences of the film. And he gets into this open area, and it's just like the volcano. There's like volcanoes and like statues. Clearly, like humans were living here, praising
Yep.
this titan. And like he
Yep.
walks up the sets of stairs with the nuke, and like you see Godzilla's spikes, and then like the smoke clears, and there's his face, and he starts the nuke. The countdown timer 60 seconds, and this is the first time ever in the history of a Godzilla film where someone has actually touched him.
Yes.
And he goes up to him, he takes his glove off. He's already dying, so he takes his mask off. He knows he's going to die anyway, so he takes
Yep.
his helmet off, he takes his gloves off, and the smoke clears, and Godzilla's head's there, and he opens his eyes. Godzilla opens his eyes, and he's looking at Sarazawa, and he walks up to him, places his hand on the front of his nose, and he gives him a speech, and he says thank you in Japanese, and it's the most brilliant piece of dialogue in the film.
Yep.
And he says, I'll miss you, and he's like, this has been a journey. And Godzilla, and it's like at that point the nuke explodes, and it's
Giving
like
Godzilla all his power
yeah
back.
And then we cut to the humans again, and they've made it to the surface because the blast pushed them faster. I don't know how they made it so fast.
Story.
Story. They immediately were on the surface. And then all of a sudden you see this, they go outside and it's pouring rain, and like there's this tsunami whirlpool happening in the middle. And then all of a sudden you hear the dun dun dun, the music's happening, and you see these massive spikes coming up from the ocean. And this guy, Godzilla, this beast, he received the biggest upgrade in history, because he looked like that before, but you knew Michael Dougherty. He wanted the original spikes on him.
Yes.
He wanted him to be a little bit different, so he used this as a way to redesign Godzilla.
I was gonna ask you, I'm like, because he looks different.
Yeah, he's more beefy. He's got a little bit bigger head, but his spikes are gigantic. His hands are more claw-like, and his feet are now like more, instead of a stump like in the first movie, they're more of a claw. So I think they use this to help like push his evolution a little bit further. But this scene, he looks incredible.
He does.
And when they use he comes down, he looks at the humans, and it's like a straight shot on Godzilla's face, and he's like pissed, but it's also like, I'm ready to like go fight.
His like muzzle is down, and you see his like forehead, and it looks so angry. He's like so ready to go.
I don't know. And then the humans, it cuts back to Mark. He's like, nobody move. It's like, what is that going? Like, has that ever? He's not a T-Rex. He's a intellectual creature.
Exactly. And I think was the other part for me. It was like that scene with them, like the humans interacting with Godzilla, was okay, but at the same time I'm like, we just had a great scene with Sarazawa and Godzilla. I don't need another human interaction with Godzilla. I want Godzilla to come up out of the whirlpool, look pissed, and go.
He technically did, like, though.
But he kind of like looked down at them, like shot some like smoke out of his nose, and then he went off.
Because he blasted the atomic breath in the air, and then he looked down at them.
That's right.
Because he was releasing all his energy. But I think he was also like acknowledging them. It's like, you did this to me, now I'm going to go handle my business.
Right.
But it's like, I don't think the humans need to be like, nobody move. It's like, I understand you don't want to pose as a threat, but you're not a threat anyway.
Exactly. He'll eat all of you
Yeah.
in a second.
So anyway, we haven't talked about the mom at all, but I just really don't want to.
To keep
We
it.
cut to Madison, which is Millie Bobby Brown, and she steals the
Yep.
orca, which is hilarious that she just grabs it and goes, and no one's watching
Yeah.
over this. And she brings it to the baseball stadium in
She brings
Boston,
it to Fenway
Fenway
Park.
Park, and
Yep.
she hooks it up to the speakers and sends out the orca signal to draw
Yep.
King Ghidorah and all the monsters there. So that's where the final battle takes place, is in Boston. There's a part
Hmm.
where after Ghidorah finds out she's there, and he starts blasting and destroying Met Stadium, and she's running down the stairs. She gets hit by the biggest piece of cement I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. And
And
she goes like, ah!
she just walks it off. So I cut that scene out entirely. I'm like, I don't need to
Good.
see her fumbling around in there. It's like, just have her
No.
escape and whatever. And then Godzilla shows up, and the army.
Yep.
Another good dialogue moment from Mark, which is the only one he's had, is just like, no, we're going to join the fight.
Yeah.
And then so all the army's there, and Godzilla's there, and the music's going, and he blasts Ghidorah with this fire, the atomic breath, and it cuts back to him, and he's running into battle, and the music's pumping, the classic Godzilla's pumping, and Millie Bobby Brown just chilling on the ground. It's like, you shouldn't even be alive. It's
Yeah.
like, none of you should be alive. But anyway, they go toe to toe, they connect. Godzilla's giving him the 1-2. He hits him with like an uppercut at one point. He
Yes.
smacks the one head away and claws up the other one. But then they
Yep.
cut back to the humans a bunch. I'm just like, I'm so tired of this.
Yes. And what I really dislike about the scenes with the humans is the fact that they're so close
Yeah,
to the action.
it's too close.
Too close. It's too close. And we know the destruction that these monsters
Yeah.
create around them. It's almost impossible for them to survive. And yet they do.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't. Just, we don't. I don't want to see that. It's like everything is like my disbelief has already been suspended enough to watch giant ancient monsters fight. I don't want humans to have that same movie luck.
Yeah. It's like when
I don't
they
need it.
go to try to find Madison. And then another great dialogue moment is when O'Shea Jackson Jr., he says, if I had YouTube for parents, I'd run away from home too. And they're like, what did you just say? He's like, if I had YouTube for parents, I'd run away from home too. And they're like, they're going home. It's like, conveniently, they lived in Boston. Like, come on.
I know.
It's like, and then all of a sudden they're going
on.
to the house and it's like trashed. And it's like, Madison survived with a whole wall of cement and brick. She
on top
survived
of a tub.
How'd that tub not break? And her hand just
That's
hanging
a
there.
strong tub.
It's like, get out of here.
That's a strong porcelain tub.
It's ridiculous. But anyway, let's get back to, we're going to cap it off with some good.
Yes.
Let's cut back to the monsters, because I think everybody knows the human portion in this film is absolutely atrocious.
Yes.
So we're cutting back to the monsters, and there's a scene where Ghidorah's up against the building. Mothra comes down from the sky. It's like it splits the sea, and Mothra comes up and webs into the building.
Yep.
And it's like, oh my God, Mothra's here. And it's like, Godzilla's here. And then you see the reflection in the building, and Godzilla's coming towards Ghidorah, and he just plows him through the building, and it's such a good scene. Rodan comes in and starts fighting Mothra to save Ghidorah, kind of thing, because he's still under control. And they're going back and forth, and Mothra stabs him through the chest. Rodan has her pinned up against a building, and Mothra's freaking out, and then we find out she has a stinger. And he stabs her right through Rodan right through the shoulder, and he lets out a cry and falls to the ground.
Yep.
At this point, Mothra's pretty much beat up. She's got fire all over her wings.
Yep.
And she's pretty much at her wit's end.
Yep.
And then Godzilla, at this point, he doesn't stand a chance against Ghidorah. Ghidorah basically wraps his heads around Godzilla, flies up into the air, and drops him from like outer atmosphere.
For the Pokemon fans, that's a seismic toss.
Yeah, he did the seismic toss. And he immediately lights up in a fire, and he hits the ground. And it's like, that alone should have killed everybody around.
Yeah, that was another. Yeah, I commented out loud. When I watch movies, I'm quite silent.
Yeah, same.
If something ridiculous happens, I'm like, come on. And that's what I said.
Yeah.
I was like, they'd be dead.
Yeah,
they'd be
100%.
Unalive there.
It's more than probably a nuke. This Titan probably weighs 3 gigaton. Like, I don't even know how much. It's too much.
I don't know how much he is.
He fell from millions of feet in the air.
How much?
And so he lands, right? And Ghidorah comes back. You see, it cuts back to Godzilla, and he's like totally done. But you can see in his skin, there's something happening to him. Yeah. And he's like, this is when it cuts back to the other guy, and he's counting down how much longer Godzilla has till he blows. So stupid. And then so Mothra, you see Mothra creep on top of Godzilla,
Yep.
and it spreads its wings, and it
Yeah.
lights up, and it's doing an intimidation thing to protect her king, right? Because she's the
Yep.
queen,
Yep.
and Ghidorah's roaring, and she's giving off her best, and then she goes up, and it's the most heroic thing in the movie, and she
Oh, yeah.
goes. And she doesn't do much, but she goes full steam ahead, and Ghidorah blasts her with this thing, and it disintegrates her. But she lets
Yep.
out the most beautiful cry. It's like, I'm not going to let him go out without me protecting him. And
Yep.
she disintegrates, and then that's when her aura and her life force energy ascends onto Godzilla.
Yeah.
And this has happened before in a Godzilla film with Rodan. I don't know if you've ever seen Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla.
Years
In the
ago.
Heisei era, it was in the late 80s. It was one of the second or third movie. But Rodan's energy went onto Godzilla, and his atomic breath turned, and his spikes went from blue to red, and that's how he's able to beat Mechagodzilla.
Yes.
So he got like an energy boost. So Mothra did this, and it cuts back to the humans again. And they're like, somehow this orca, they could fix it because it was like mauled to pieces. And they're like, oh yeah, we just have to spark it back together. And anyway, what I don't understand is why it's like she wanted to make a heroic moment for herself with the mom. She took the orca instead of going off on the plane and flying away from the scene. She like wanted to save her daughter, I guess, and so she went into the car and sacrificed herself to give Godzilla more time, even though they didn't really know. She goes, "Long live the king." I was like, "You don't deserve this line."
Right.
And then it cuts back to like everything burning, and like all of a sudden you see Godzilla come pouring through, and he's like everything's melting instantly.
And he's got like the red crackles in his scales. Like he is going off.
Yeah, and then it cuts to him, and you see him in all his glory, and he's just burning. All his scales are burning, and it's a callback to Godzilla vs. Destroya when he's melting down from being too radioactive, and he can't control the energy anymore, and he's just full. And then Ghidorah's freaking out, and then Godzilla does this moment where he doesn't use the atomic breath. He lets out this massive atomic burst. Yeah, and when he does that, the atomic pulse, that's what they call it. And then when he lets it out, you hear Mothra's cry, and you could see Mothra's wings in the burst.
Yes.
And then disintegrates Ghidorah, and it's like, I'm in so much pain, his wings are gone.
Yeah, because that's his first pulse is it gets rid of his wings.
Yeah, gets rid of his wings, and Ghidorah's like trying to electrocute him with his own beam, and it does absolutely nothing. And it's like Godzilla, he doesn't feel nothing at this point. And then he loves, I don't know if you noticed this, but Godzilla loves a chest stomp.
Yes.
He loves just getting down there. He putting the foot on the chest and just giving it to him. He puts the foot on the chest and he does another atomic pulse, and it just disintegrates a couple of the heads, and there's like one left. And like you can tell this is over. Yeah. And this is the last pulse where everything like clouds over and everything like disintegrates. And you're like, oh my God, what happened? Everything is in rubble. And all of a sudden you see Ghidorah's head come out of the rubble, and you're like, oh my God, it's like, how is he still alive? But then you see it's inside Godzilla's mouth, and he has part of his neck, and he's like dragging him around. And then Godzilla's back to normal at this point because he's unleashed all of his energy. And then at this point, Godzilla lights up his spikes. The Ghidorah head comes up into frame, and you see the eyes from Godzilla's atomic breath come through the mouth of Ghidorah, and his eyes lights up blue, and he disintegrates him.
So good. The finishing blows in both of these movies so far have been just spectacular.
Yeah. And at that point, you're just like, okay, he won. And then what's a nice little detail is after he blew him up and like ate it, he was like munching, and then you could see the electricity in like his teeth, and he's like shaking it off, and he's like, yeah, I just did that. And at that point, I think this is the biggest fault of this movie, is the very end. This movie ended too quick. You see Ghidorah getting blown to pieces. Godzilla's there. The humans are flying off, and all of a sudden, all these monsters come from out of nowhere.
Yep.
Because Ghidorah called them to them, but like they just show up out of nowhere, and he's giving them all a look.
Yep. They're circled around him.
Rodan bows to him. There's another Muto for some reason. I don't know where that one came from.
Right. It looked like it. Yeah.
And then there's the behemoth and all these other creatures, and then Godzilla, it cuts to him in the middle, and he roars, and then that's the end of the movie. It's like, well, they kind of came out of nowhere, but I feel like they needed a way to finish it. Right. But that's the end of the movie.
Yep.
So overall, good monster stuff. Definitely not as great as the first one, but I can't watch this movie as the regular cut. I have to.
I'm gonna have to watch it. This will be the last time
I watch this movie for a while.
Yeah,
but
I'll definitely watch your cut.
Yeah,
I'll watch your cut. Yeah, honestly, like the monster designs were amazing. I enjoyed every single scene with Mothra in it.
I did. Yep. I
It
agree.
was beautiful.
Yep.
Even when she first came out of the cocoon, I was like, "Oh, this is
Yep.
cool."
Her
Like, there's just
cry,
like
so good.
like there was just a really nice reverence for that monster,
Even the
and they
larva
did it.
form.
Yeah, like they did a really good job with her, and I everything about the monsters' interactions, I thought they did really really well.
Yeah. Before we move on to Godzilla vs. Kong,
Yeah,
there's a lot of hidden details in the credits of this movie with articles and other stuff like that talking about. So I don't know if you know this. You probably don't because you're not a huge into the Godzilla lore. But whenever
no,
Mothra sacrifices herself, she does it because she's already laid an egg to replenish, to revive herself. So
okay,
in the credits, there's a news article that says monster a Titan egg found in the middle of the rainforest, which is where Mothra was. So whenever
right,
Mothra sacrifices herself, there's always a way for her to come back. So there's an egg in the credits that has been Monarch found this egg and it's been in the hiding. So Mothra's
what?
egg is there. And then there's another part where Godzilla is keeping tabs on all these other monsters. But there's an article that says they're heading towards Skull Island. And they never capitalize on that. Like all these monsters heading towards Skull Island. And I'm just like, which we'll
Oh,
get into in Godzilla vs. Kong, because when we
yeah,
rewrite this film, I'm going to incorporate that because there's a lot of details. Even when you pause it, there's some stuff. And then there's a part deep down in the corner. It's like you had to really go down. They talk about this scientist, Della Rosa. And
okay,
Monarch has been experimenting with making biological titans. And
yeah,
Della Rosa in that language means rose,
yeah,
so form rose, and I think people were like, oh, that's a hint of Biolante. They've been
okay,
messing with this DNA and mixing with plants, and they've been trying to make organic titans by themselves. So I think they've been doing to that. But then they also mention in that article underneath, they talk about Mechagodzilla. But
oh,
people, if they wouldn't have known that if they didn't pause the credits every time a new article came up and read certain aspects of the newspaper. But
right.
anyway, there was so much stuff in the credits that it's just like, man, you guys didn't really utilize this at all in the next movie. But let's dive into Godzilla versus Kong. This movie, I think, made a mistake in making it 5 years after King of the Monsters. So much happened at the end of King of the Monsters. You know, why didn't Kong
Mm-hmm.
respond to Ghidorah and all this? What was
Right.
happening to all that stuff? And they just decided to like, we don't want to fill in the gaps, like this moth or egg and all this other stuff they found of all the other Titans. They didn't want to have to worry about that, so they're like, oh, let's just time jump this because at the beginning of Godzilla vs Kong, they show this screen and it says all the monsters, all the Titans have been defeated, which makes absolutely no sense because it showed Ghidorah and it
No.
said defeated, and then it showed all the other monsters and we know Ghidorah's dead,
Right.
and then it showed all the other Titans and said they were defeated as well, like Rodan's defeated and all this other stuff. And it's like, what do you mean they're defeated? Because
Yeah.
last I checked, at the King of the Monsters, Rodan was chilling in a volcano. It's like
Right.
none of these monsters. You said Godzilla was keeping tabs on them. None of these monsters can be defeated without another
Right.
Titan fighting them. So I don't understand why they decided to block out all the other Titans just to have this one-on-one film. So that's my thing, and they also wanted to make the excuse for advancing technology. The technology in this film is stupid. Like their
Uh.
spaceships, they go from regular army aircraft carriers to
Yes.
this tech that can like it's absurd.
That can like go into like anti gravity
Yeah, it
areas.
has all
And
this
yeah.
like force field stuff. It doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
So anyway, before we do that, the end credit scene of King of the Monsters shows
Yes.
the bad guy who's
Yep.
barely
Charles
used,
Dance.
Charles Dance.
Yep.
He meets up with these fishermen.
I'm assuming they're like black market
Yeah, black market.
dealers. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they have a head of Ghidorah. You could say they found that one from when Godzilla ripped it off in the ocean. That's the one they used because the other ones were disintegrated.
Right. Yeah.
So that's probably the one they have. But that's the end credit scene where Charles Dance says, "I'll take it." So it's the head of Ghidorah, which
Yeah.
cuts to Godzilla vs Kong. This movie opens up with Kong on the Skull Island, and we find out he's been encapsulated in this monarch dome
Containment
containment dome.
area
And I'm just
that
like,
looks like Skull Island.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like they use this.
And it's on Skull
It's
Island.
on Skull Island. It's like I don't understand the purpose of that, and we'll get into that when I rewrite the film because I don't think they needed that whatsoever. The humans in this movie, I think, are worse than King of the Monsters.
Yes.
Madison Russell, I can't stand her. They introduce Brian Tyree Henry. He's Bernie, but he's just a knockoff Bryan Cranston. He's the exact same character. He's a theorist who lost somebody,
Yes.
but we didn't see him lose anybody, so we have none of that. That's just spoken through dialogue that he had a person named Sarah who was his love. We didn't
Right.
have that, like, he's just a remake of Bryan Cranston because we saw the devastation that Bryan Cranston lost. We understood
Yeah.
his reasoning. We don't understand his reasoning for all this. He's just a guy who podcasts about, like, he's like in the know.
Right. It almost feels like I think they did him a little dirty in the fact that he is this like conspiracy theorist with like a tragic loss, but he's like comedy relief.
Yeah.
Make him a Bryan Cranston 2.0. Like give him a
But I don't think you needed
like
that whole, those three
I don't think so
characters,
either.
Julian, Dennison. I cannot stand this actor. After seeing Deadpool 2, I could not stand his character. And when they announced him for this movie, I was like, I already can't. I was already going
I
into this
didn't.
movie like I can't stand him as an actor and as like not to I don't know him as a person, but
Yeah.
what I've seen him play in movies, I can't stand the way his characters are. And in this one, it's the
Mm.
same way. He's just the dumb sidekick that Millie Bobby
Well,
Brown pushes around because she's a real B in this movie.
yeah.
And those
I
three
feel
characters
like
are just used to conveniently follow the plot to wherever the plot needed to
yes.
go.
Right. I feel like if humans are a pawn in like the story and they have to follow, they're not compelling.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't like bumbling characters.
Yeah.
It doesn't do any good for anybody.
And all of them were. They're just
Yeah.
preventing the story from actually moving. And so I'm
Yeah.
not going to really talk about them too much because I don't think they're needed at all. But the one character who I think steals this movie is an actress called Kaylee Hoddle, and she plays Gia. She
Yes.
is the most
Yeah.
interesting character in this film.
Yes.
And what I
And
think,
she signs everything.
yeah, what I think is a problem, and the director said that this movie had 5 hours of footage and they cut it down to this hour and 45. They spent so much of this movie expediting scenes with dialogue instead of showing us what actually happened. Like
Right.
her whole Gia's backstory was explained to us with Rebecca Hall's Eileen Andrews' character talking to Alexander Skarsgård's character, Dr.
Yep.
Nathan Lind. Her family got, wiped out by the storm, and then I chose at that moment to make an oath to protect her. And everything is said through dialogue instead of
Right.
visually
Like
showing us.
just show me.
These
Show
stop
me.
talking.
Yep.
That's the problem with this movie. Too many characters talk too much instead of showing
Yeah.
us stuff.
And they're all like relatively like big name actors,
Yeah,
all unfortunately like having to vie for screen time.
yeah.
We don't need that many
Again, there's
people.
too many characters. That's said
Yeah.
with the villains. The villains are so useless in this film because
Yeah.
the King of the Monsters villain, sorry, what's his name again? The actor?
Charles Dance.
Charles Dance. He's not in this film. Why?
Yeah, he's not there at all.
This
Right.
other new guy, Walter Simmons, who's the head of Apex, this
Yep.
other new facility that came out of nowhere. He's the
I
villain,
know.
and he doesn't do anything other than have this facility. And
Right.
who has his henchman, who they just gloss over, is Ren Serizawa's son, or that's his name, Ren Serizawa.
Yeah,
He's
it's Dr.
Dr.
Serizawa's son.
Serizawa's son, but they gloss that over.
I didn't. Yeah, I looking at the cast was the first time I noticed who that was.
Yeah,
Yeah, I feel like Walter Simmons as like the villain. I'll say it now. Who makes Mecha Godzilla? Like we need a villain. We need a villain to make Mecha Godzilla. It's
right.
kind of he's kind of there. He needs to be there.
But in my my thoughts, you're calling this movie Godzilla versus Kong.
Right.
And the whole movie, Kong is not. They want you to feel like he's the main character to Godzilla. Like Godzilla is clearly made out to be the villain in this movie.
Yeah.
And I don't think they should have put Mecha Godzilla in this at all.
What do you think would have been better?
Just focus on. We'll get to it in a rewrite, but the whole movie should
Yeah.
focus on Godzilla versus Kong.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
Mecha Godzilla should not have been in this movie. If anything, he should be the next one, or they go about it in a different way. I don't think he should have been in the film. As great of a scene as it was, it didn't. The plot of this doesn't make any sense. I'm just gonna hop to the end because they need an energy source to fuel Mechagodzilla because he can't stay powered up for too long.
Right.
And they're using Ghidorah's skull as like a cybernetic link, a psychic link, because they tell us that Ghidorah can talk telepathically because his necks are so long to connect Mechagodzilla to the host, who is Ren Serizawa, who's sitting in this skull, manning this thing from far away. But what I don't understand is where did they get the second skull from to be able to connect to Mechagodzilla? Because there was only one head.
Right.
There was only one head.
Right. And to me, yeah, you're right. It's like, oh, there was another one in Mechagodzilla.
Yeah.
To make that connection.
Unless they used the brain, but I doubt that because they were funneling from the skull bones, like the DNA of the skull. But then the other thing is we're just going to get this out of the way so we can start from fresh and redo this whole movie.
Yeah.
When they're in Middle Earth with Kong and the useless Apex soldiers take a sample and they USB Bluetooth this sample to Apex thousands of miles up to Tokyo. And they're like, oh yeah, we just need the sample of the thing. That makes absolutely no sense. You
Yeah.
need a
I don't.
physical energy source to put into Mechagodzilla. You can't just Bluetooth the thing and they're
Right.
like, oh, they're replicating the sample. It's okay, I get they can scan it and replicate it, but you have to have a physical power source in order to put that into him in order to run. You can't just be like, oh yeah, we're replicating it and now he works.
Right. Yeah, they didn't really go through like the logistics of any of that.
They
It's like,
didn't know.
wait, how does this work? How does this science work? Like, how does this tech work?
Yeah, which is
It's like,
why they
yeah,
shouldn't have Mechagodzilla, because the tech they cannot explain. Because this goes
right.
into the part where after he gets the power source, Mechagodzilla becomes sentient, which is a cool scene because you can see in the background he's like turning his
Yeah,
head.
he turns
And
over, yeah,
Serizawa gets like shocked. But I think what they wanted to happen was have Ghidorah take over Ren's mind. But they
yeah,
didn't show that because they clearly had to cut for time. But when Mechagodzilla's fighting Godzilla and Kong, he is fully sentient.
yeah,
And when they cut back to the trio of Millie Bobby Brown, Brian Tyree, because they're in Japan now, they found a way
yeah,
to make it there.
yeah.
Plot. They dump water on the control panel, and it causes Mechagodzilla to like malfunction for a second.
Right.
Makes
Just like
no
a split
sense.
second.
Makes
I
no
know.
sense because he's sentient. He's not controlled by their power source anymore.
Right.
Also, the water wouldn't have affected him. It wouldn't have affected the computer that fast. It was barely any
I
water.
know.
They
Right.
could have cut all that out and just cut to Godzilla earlier of him blasting Kong's as he's holding the tail of Mechagodzilla with the axe. They
Yep.
could have cut to it earlier of Godzilla blasting the axe and then gone it. You don't need the humans to save them.
Right.
This whole movie was the humans saving Kong every time.
Yes.
They make
And
Kong look like such a fool this whole movie.
they do. And I think it's so interesting going from Godzilla 2014 where the humans are doing things obviously in response to Godzilla fighting the Mutos. Now this one it's all like the monsters are incompetent on their own
Yeah.
without the humans. It's like, are you kidding? No, they're not.
This movie is titled Godzilla vs. Kong. Rebecca Hall's character, she said Godzilla will come for him. If Godzilla was going to come for him because they had this ancient rivalry, which they never showed because they just needed to use dialogue to say it,
They
what was he
literally
doing
had
the
one
last
thing at the
5
beginning.
years?
Exactly. What is so special about Kong or Skull Island that keeps him like off of Godzilla's radar?
Yeah,
I don't get it.
I don't either.
I never understood
so in about 5 minutes when we start redoing this movie, we're going to go from the top and I'll have my notes and we can kind of go from there. But this movie, listen, the fight on the water is so cool. But again,
that. It is.
the humans are saving him. Kong lost immediately. He had no chance.
Yeah.
And then when they go to Middle Earth, he would have lost to the Warbats again. It's like, how many times do the humans have to save Kong? It's
Right.
like, I don't believe Kong could ever beat Godzilla.
Right.
In
Based
general,
on all of this.
not
yeah.
even based on it. He has no chance ever.
Right.
Even before this
Right.
movie came out, I'm like, he's not going to win.
Yeah.
But you've already set up that Kong can't do anything by himself.
That's what I mean. Yeah. They're literally telegraphing to us in every instance that Kong is not capable of defeating Godzilla.
Because he can't beat lesser monsters
Exactly.
without humans' aid.
Yep.
Because that thing was going to choke him out before the humans blasted it, and then he ripped it apart, whatever. Then he found the axe. But then it's like, yeah, the final fight in Hong Kong, it was really those two pitted against each other. He had no help, really, other than the axe.
Right.
That was the best part of the movie. And
It
then
was.
you got into the whole, like, Godzilla making Kong submit.
Yep.
But then at that point, when he does that, it's almost like, okay, Godzilla's done with him. He's looking for the real problem. Kong is just
Right.
something in his way. That's basically what this whole movie's been.
And it's so interesting because it's like, who is the main monster in this movie?
Yeah.
Like,
They want
'cause
it to
we're
be
focused-
Kong because he's
Right,
the good
'cause
guy.
all the story beats are on him.
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh, Godzilla has his sights on the real bad guy. So is Godzilla the main monster? Like, main character? I don't know. Like, I
But
don't.
Mechagodzilla has been haunting this whole movie as the main villain. Where
Right.
Godzilla's just smacking Kong around. They considered round 2 goes to Kong because after they did the whole atomic breath and axe
Powering up
collision,
the axe.
Godzilla was
Yeah.
like on the ground. He didn't really. I wouldn't say that's round 2 because they were both knocked back and Kong's there.
Yeah.
But after they fight in round 3 ends so fast because Godzilla's like, I'm so sick and tired of you.
Yep.
He knocks him aside, steps on his chest, crushes his chest or
He
whatever.
probably broke some ribs.
Broke some ribs or whatever. Gives him a nod saying, okay, you submit to me. Now I'm done with you. I'm trying to find what's causing me to lose control of this whole movie.
Right.
I think we should go into recrafting this movie in order to set up Godzilla and Kong to be the final film.
Yep.
So if I may start with my notes.
Go for it.
We're opening the movie with a flashback to the Primal War.
Okay.
The war they've been talking about for 2 movies. This opening scene is going to cost $60 million. This whole movie, this opening portion of this movie, there's going to be no humans whatsoever.
Budget is no object.
I'm not.
For
This movie's
Brian.
going to cost $250 million. Listen, if you're going to make Godzilla vs. Kong, I'm making it the best it can be.
Yeah.
So we're flashed back to the Primal War. Where Kong is in his youngest state. Because in Skull Island, he's like a teenager a bit. He's a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in his perspective, we're witnessing his species defending Middle Earth, their sanction, like their throne, the throne room in Godzilla vs. Kong.
Yeah.
We're witnessing them defending the throne against, the skull crawlers and other monsters.
Yeah.
That's happening. We're witnessing this, the war bats and all that other stuff. We witness Kong's parents. We see Kong's parents, so we have that, like, where I'm basically going in with like a Kung Fu Panda 2 backstory.
Okay.
This is Poe is haunted by something, and his parents were killed by something he doesn't know, but it's constantly throughout this movie. We'll get flashbacks to what's causing him having this issue that he's having. The parents are telling him to run and all this other stuff. And at that point, we see them do all the signing. So we set up right away that Kong knows how to sign. And there's a language barrier there, so it's not a surprise later on. And they tell him to run. One by one, like, this species are getting overrun, and they place Kong in the throne room, and his father closes the doors. That's when you see him close the doors, and you get that handprint on the door you see so you get the origin of that. It's just a subtle detail, whatever.
Yeah.
And before the doors close, you see a beam of blue light, and you hear a massive roar, and it's Godzilla's roar. But before the doors close, you see this blue light and whatever. So that's the opening flashback. And then it cuts to Kong waking up from a nightmare. In this nightmare, he wakes up. In the real world, we're back in 2019. And it's Ghidorah's roar. So we're on Skull Island, and he wakes up from this massive cry. At this point, we're getting rid of the bubble dome that they did to him in Godzilla vs. Kong. It's an open island. So at this point, Ghidorah's roar has launched, and all of a sudden Skull Island starts erupting, and all these monsters start coming up from the depths, and G is there, and all the tribe people. Monarch's there, but they're not enclosed, whatever. At this point, we get to see Kong protecting his island, right? We see him being a beast. The reason why he is the king of this island, and he's not really, it's like kind of like Mothra doesn't pay attention to Ghidorah. Kong is his own apex, like, alpha male. And he is protecting this island. These monsters are going crazy. Skull crawlers are coming up. You get war bats and all these other things. And he's protecting the people of this island. So you get a lot of good shots of him being the protector. He knows where the people are, so he's kind of around trying to prevent that from happening. But she is the one he saves. Good. He sees Gia, picks her up. He signs to her then, "Are you okay?" Like, we already have this, like, connection he can talk to the people. And then so he picks up Gia. They head to the middle of the forest. So, like, to bring her to safety, he tries to, like, hide away in, like, his throne cave or wherever he wants to go in the forest. And at that point, then we'll cut to the point where Godzilla defeats Ghidorah. Okay. And the very end of the movie, and Godzilla roars, and he becomes the alpha male. And so that echoes, kind of like Zack Snyder's Justice League, where Superman's cry echoes across the world. So it's like Ghidorah's cry echoing, Godzilla's cry echoing, and it cuts back to Skull Island, and all the monsters stop, and it cuts to Kong. And he hasn't heard this roar since, like, his nightmares, and he immediately has, like, this look on his face, and then he roars back, and that's when we cut to Godzilla vs. Kong, the title card. So right then and there, it sets up this mystery of, like, we know Godzilla was in Middle Earth fighting them, but we don't see him yet. And so we get this slow reveal of, like, Godzilla's the one that's been slowly taking his species out. I also forgot to mention, when end of King of the Monsters, they've already set up that there's a Middle Earth below Skull Island. So I don't know why they had to go to Antarctica to do that. Skull Island is where this movie is going to take place. Going forward we're going to go 2 weeks later. We're not going to jump in 5 years. This is immediate. Godzilla's home is destroyed. He's the king of the monsters. He needs a home. He needs a place to go. So we'll go 2 weeks later. and I want it to open on Ren Serizawa because I think he needs to be more of a character. They'll set up, he's a scientist, he's not just some dude in a cloak. He is torn between believing that his father sacrificed himself and Godzilla killing him. So
Okay, yeah,
he's at this crossroads where it's like his father believed in the protection of these creatures, but then he's also like, my father died to these creatures like that he tried to protect. And
right.
at that point, we get introduced to the villain again from the second movie,
Yeah,
Charles
Charles
Dance,
Dance.
and
Okay.
he manipulates Ren into thinking like the villain side, like he's definitely the one, and we need to defend ourselves against these creatures. So we need to do something to do this because they have the head of Ghidorah, and we're going
Yep.
to utilize the skull, the bones they found in 2014
In that
in that cave,
cave.
the bones of
Yes.
Dagon. We're going to utilize those two things for
Yep.
Godzilla and Kong. This is just going to set up in this
Right.
movie. There's not going to be any other
Yep.
villain, but we're going to set up that they set up in King of the Monsters. They're making organic titans, but they need like kind of like they needed the power source for Mechagodzilla. They need some more DNA, like living. They need something living in order to make this work. So that's when
Right.
they introduce us to Alexander Skarsgård's character. That's when they meet up. Instead of having this other Apex guy, they meet up, do the same plot where he goes to find Rebecca Hall's character and they re-up, so they
Hmm.
need to go to Middle Earth kind of thing. And so we have all this set up where they manipulate Alexander's character into taking them to Middle Earth, like infiltrating Monarch into going to Middle Earth to grab some sort of species that lives down there, DNA, in order to have that to weave into Ghidorah's regenerative abilities because they're going to use that, and then the bones of this
Yep.
other creature, like the DNA, to mix them all together. And then I'll let you have thoughts of my opening so far.
Obviously, this is quite a bit different than what already has been
Right.
established. But I think it actually it's set up like a like a well thought out
Monster movie.
intro, right? Because it's like
Backstory.
right, you have backstory. Why would Kong and Godzilla be fighting? Oh, Godzilla was attacking Kong and his family and species in the Hollow
Yeah.
Earth centuries ago, and it still haunts him now. And now we know where Kong was during the events of
King of
King of the
Monsters. Right.
Monsters. Yeah, because it's like, why didn't he fight
We
too?
know he
Like,
can't
what?
swim.
Right,
There have to have
we
been
get it.
all these
Yeah,
other monsters were rising up from everywhere. Skull Island had to have
right,
been affected, right?
exactly.
And he's the protector of
Like,
the island, so we need to build up him as a character that he can take on
right,
anything, as well as like
yeah,
showing him that just like in the other movie, Godzilla vs Kong, the original, where he
yep,
doesn't need the humans to defend himself.
right, right. Again, we're trying to make a compelling standalone monster
Yeah,
here, not like this monster can't handle himself. The humans have to intervene, and that's where again the story was dragging because humans were always
yeah,
intervening at every step of the
and,
way. This time, it's like, okay, now we have a competent main
yeah,
monster to go up against another competent main
and he's been
monster.
fighting for decades on Skull Island, so he's like, we see him
Right.
utilize his environment.
Right. Now we have a new contender, well, an old one, Godzilla, coming onto his turf.
Right.
Kong might be a little bit underprepared, but he has like home field
Yeah.
advantage. So he knows how to utilize the space. He knows the limitations of the land. But it could also kind of go into like, we're still kind of rooting for Kong because we know he might have a little bit of a disadvantage because Godzilla is just
Yeah.
nuts.
And we're using the
Oh,
flashback
go ahead.
scenes, so we don't have to hear the humans talk about this ancient rivalry that's been going
Right.
on, but we don't know why it's been going on. Like, we never saw it. So we're
Right.
using these as a way to get rid of that dialogue altogether.
Yeah. And it's like, good, I do want to know what that ancient rivalry was. But if we are to interact with Hollow Earth as like a primary location, I kind of want to know a little bit more about
Right.
it. If I'm there for 5 seconds, I don't care. Cool. It's built into the world.
Yeah.
It's old. Nobody knows about it. It's just something we deal with now. But they deal with Hollow Earth as this like staple place. We're there for a long time. We should be comfortable with it. This is why we're here. It actually means something to
Right.
Kong. And not just, he's in the throne room, picks up a random
Yeah.
axe, and okay, powers
Yeah.
up, whatever. So, yeah, that's really good. The idea that Ren Serizawa is a character,
Yeah.
use Ren Serizawa as this like conflicted new character, because we lost Ken
Yeah.
Watanabe's character in the last one. So it's like, okay, we're still following like the families
Yeah.
that are involved in
Yeah.
this. Yeah, have him grapple with, did my father die protecting Godzilla? Did he die because of him? And then have, whether it's Walter Simmons or Charles Dance, kind of lead him towards him like dying because of
Right. Yeah.
Godzilla. And he's like, and push him further and further throughout the movie. And then he's like, oh yeah, that's the last straw.
Yeah.
And then, right. Anyway, continue. I like it so far.
So yeah, we cut to back to Skull Island, and they're getting all these alerts from the news that Godzilla is coming to Skull Island, and they have to prepare. And then at this point, I don't know if you've ever seen, there was a Call of Duty. It was like an event, and they had this cutscene where it was on Skull Island, and Kong is on the top of the mountain, and it cuts to the ocean, and Godzilla's coming. You can see Godzilla coming towards Skull Island. It looks exactly like the movie. The cinematics are crazy, and he's like rising up from the
Whoa.
ocean, and Kong is like beating his chest, and he's like roaring, and he starts running off this mountain towards the ocean, and Godzilla rises
That's
up
cool.
and roars. So I think I want to utilize a little bit of that.
That'd be cool.
But then before we do that, like when Kong sees Godzilla rise up from the ocean, it's like there's another quick like flash back, like another minute scene of like him going back to the primal war of like the devastation that was happening, and like a little you see a
Yeah.
little bit more, and then it cuts back to
Yeah.
Kong beating his chest, and then they head towards each other. And so this
Yeah.
this is gonna be bigger than, there's only gonna be two fights in this movie.
Okay.
Round one and round two.
I'm very interested to see how you split them up.
Round one, Kong has the biggest advantage ever because he knows exactly what his Skull Island is. He knows every corner of it, and we're
Yep.
going to see him fight in a way that we didn't see in this movie, where he's going to be throwing boulders. He's going to be using his environment, hiding behind things. He's going to be up close and personal, grappling with him, how we did with all the other monsters we saw back and all the other stuff, and like kind of using that. But Godzilla, he's not wavering in any way. There's a point where Kong realizes he has to retreat. He's not going to submit to Godzilla, but Godzilla's the alpha at this point, and there's this back and forth, and he goes to the entrance point of Middle Earth in Skull Island to retreat. And that's where we get the point where he hasn't been down there since the war, and I think we could utilize a little bit that he goes back there once in a while, but he's afraid to go down there because the skull crawlers are down there, but that's the hole they come up from.
Yes.
And he's going to have, this is the only way for him to escape. It's because he knows what's down there and he needs it, which is the power and the axe.
Yeah.
We're going to get rid of the whole, like, the warpage that happens when they go to Middle Earth. There's like this, like, in Godzilla vs. Kong, where they warp through this, like, black hole thing.
Oh, yeah.
We're just going to do it like how Godzilla burnt a hole through the Earth, and it's, like, deep in there. Okay? He's going to go down there. He's going to hide, and Godzilla's like, obviously, he didn't see him go in there, so he doesn't know, and he's just going to do the roar, and he's going to call all the monsters to him to make Monster Island. Skull Island is no more. Monster Island is happening. All the monsters are coming to him. Rodan's coming. All this other stuff. And that's when we see Kong go into Middle Earth, and we'll cut to the humans back and realizing that Godzilla has now taken control of Skull Island, and they have to be careful because they don't want to do anything because they're there. Monarch is set up there, but they're not domed in, kind of thing. Skarsgård comes in and they communicate. We have to go into Middle Earth. He convinces them we have to follow Kong. We have to make sure everything's okay, kind of thing. But he has this, like, he doesn't know their Ren's plan and everything. So they have the soldiers that follow them that they need the species from.
Yep.
So that's when we can use the humans kind of to like go into Middle Earth to follow Kong while leaving Godzilla to like monitor his newfound home
domain
and waiting for the other monsters to come. So then the humans go in there. We don't need those hovercraft things. There's no change in gravity. They just go down there to find him. And Kong, we find him like passed out. The humans wake him up, kind of thing. And throughout him walking through the Middle Earth, we get more flashbacks of his life in Middle Earth with his family. So we're not showing the fight right now. We're showing like him living there peacefully. Every time he sees something that he recognizes, we'll get like a mini flashback, kind of like in Kung Fu Panda 2, where he sees something and there's like all these flashbacks, and then the lady's like, let it flow, and he does the chi and he visually sees everything.
Yeah, that only makes sense.
It's gonna get crazy from here. But just go with me because it's a Godzilla movie, and we can do whatever we want because it's just up in arms. So we get towards the part where he sees the throne room, But meanwhile, all these other like army people are like there. They're following him around, and like they're seeing all these species crawling around. We see different monsters and stuff, and they're collecting samples secretly. But then we see the throne room, and Kong then like he gets up to the door and he sees the handprint, and that's when he opens it up. And when we open up the door, we flash back to the biggest flashback, not the most revealing, but like the biggest one of like where the war began. Like it started. We're like,
Okay, yeah.
then we visually see how the monsters, like how they started fighting in the first place. So that happens, and then when Kong enters the throne room, then he sees the axe, and when he picks up the axe, we get a scene of them creating these weapons to
Yes.
defend against what's coming. At that point, we see this is where it gets crazy.
Oh no.
In the art book of Godzilla versus Kong,
Yeah.
in this throne room, there is cave paintings all the way around the top in the art book, and it shows the fight of what's happening. So obviously the people must have painted it, but there's this
Right.
ancient Godzilla figure that's painted in blue that has wings. And it's like this,
Oh, okay.
obviously the most powerful one, and these other Godzillas are fighting the Kongs, and they have the axes in this
Yeah.
thing. We'll use the Space Godzilla in a way to like, we'll give it that design, but this is the
Okay.
original Godzilla of Middle Earth.
Right. Yeah, okay.
And what happens at that point, Kong sees the axes lying on the ground, and we do the same thing in Godzilla vs. Kong where he puts it on the ground and it lights up that
Yeah.
Godzilla tail.
That was
And
cool. I gotta say that was
And
neat.
at that point, it cuts back to Godzilla on the top, and something's happening. He heads towards the Middle Earth entrance. I think we still keep him blasting through the ground. I think that's a really cool part.
Yeah, it
But
was. Yeah.
the Middle Earth portion, the tail lights up, and something happens in Middle Earth where like something is being awakened, and that's
Okay.
when the ancient Godzilla arises from the depths
Inside Hollow
of Middle Earth.
That's cool. Okay.
And Godzilla enters there, and it's still keeping the Godzilla versus Kong aspect, but like when Godzilla sees this version, it's like he's almost afraid. It's
Okay.
like these two have been fighting. You might want to change a little bit of this. This is just coming off the dome because I had all these notes and I was like,
Yeah.
how am I going to get to the end? I feel like we should get to the point where Godzilla and Kong are fighting each other before we see the ancient Godzilla, and then it cuts back that he hasn't awakened yet. But then we get a Godzilla vs. Kong fight in Middle Earth.
Yeah.
With axe and all and everything. And that's when the other one rises from the temple that they encaged him in or whatever.
Okay.
Or whatever.
Okay.
And then that's when Kong realizes that's the one he saw, and Godzilla's afraid because this is the one was like the head honcho alpha of like it controls everything, and it's almost like there's a subspecies, but when it sees, it's like How to Train Your Dragon.
Yeah,
when
yeah,
they
yeah.
see this gigantic one, they get afraid.
Yes.
The most, the ancient one, and I think it was movie 2.
Yes, it was.
And all the dragons are like afraid. Toothless is afraid to like, it's slowly like, maybe it's like mind mending them. It's like the alpha. It's like the cry.
Well, yeah, exactly. Okay.
And then that's when they have to team up to fight this thing. And then that's when the army men, they defeat it in a absurd fashion. They use that DNA and bring it back up to go on to the next Godzilla and Kong, now that they're living together on Monster Island. And now they're co-alphas, and they understand that Godzilla wasn't the reason why they destroyed his family. Like, this thing was the reason why it controlled everything, all the monsters, to attack because it wanted straight power.
Right. And it's not even so much about being like the alpha. It's about being like the protectors.
Yeah.
Of Earth. Right. Because it's both their homes.
Yeah. Where this thing is more primal and like I'm in control of everything.
Okay. I like it. I have a couple of things that we definitely need to address in terms of like the hierarchy of what we've already seen.
Right.
Okay, I'll start. Let's call him Space Godzilla, just to make it easy.
Okay. I would agree with that. Because if you think about it, in Hollow Earth, there's a bunch of these like rock formations that look like diamonds and stuff. So he could be the formation of the Earth. Like, so we can have that going for him.
What if Space Godzilla? How do we convey to the audience and like to everybody what is Space Godzilla? Like, we have to have a motivation, essentially, aside from just fear from Godzilla, to show that Godzilla does not like this ancestor or the Space Godzilla. My thought, just like off the top of my head, Space Godzilla needs to actually come from space billions of years ago.
Right.
He's essentially the one who created the Hollow Earth based on his like impact.
Gotcha.
From there, his radiation created Godzilla's species. And there could have been potentially, like, Hollow Earth could have been created, but it was also like part of Kong's ancestors as well. Like, their land kind of crumbled into Hollow Earth, and now they have like Kong's people and Godzilla's people at odds with each other because they're on different levels now.
Right.
There has to be some kind of backstory, but I understand, like, Godzilla is afraid.
Yeah. I mean, this is just me
this.
spewing off notes for 2 hours. Like, if we
Yeah.
had more time, we could easily create a perfect reason why.
Part two.
Because I didn't want to have
Part two?
Mechagodzilla. Like, it just didn't seem.
I'm good
Yeah,
with
I was
that.
just trying to find a way to make the whole story make sense of with the whole ancestor thing, and like, because Mechagodzilla has no, other than like being Ghidorah, it has no reason to be in the movie with Kong. Like, Kong has no, other than like Gia signing to him saying, "Oh yeah, he's really the bad one," kind of deal, like manipulating to Kong. It's like, "Oh yeah, I
Right.
fought him for no reason." He kind of thing. There
Right.
needs to be a connection between the two monsters of why they team up to go
Yes.
into Fourth Godzilla and Kong, because
Yes.
that needs to be established that they're coexisting now to go into the sequel where the humans really take over. Because we can't have two movies where the humans are like, "Yeah, we need to kill him," and the next movie like, "We need to make something else to kill him." You know what I mean? There needs to be
Right.
the first portion to be organic biological connection
Yeah.
from Middle Earth, and the
Yeah.
next one needs to be, okay, now that we need to figure out these two need to, this monsterverse needs to go. Like, we can't have these
Right.
monsters around anymore.
Right. Yes. Okay. So I totally agree, because, yeah, let them resolve their problems without a lot of human intervention. They've become amicable protectors of Earth at the end of this movie. And then Kong and Godzilla, they have to fight. I don't know yet.
Right.
But
Yeah.
what is your thought for a sequel?
Okay, so now that we've wrapped, we're going to end the exact same way Godzilla versus Kong ended, with Godzilla going off, but he's just going to go back up to Monster Island where all the monsters are now, and he's just going to protect them there, and Kong's going to stay underneath, where Monarch's still going to monitor both. It's basically a sanctuary for monsters, and this is their new home, and they don't have to be around the whole entire planet. But the post-credit scene of Godzilla versus Kong is going to be Ren Sarazawa and the bad guy. They're in their science lab, and they're cooking up something for the next movie, and we see it's not Mechagodzilla. They're utilizing the bones the Ghidorah had for its ability to regenerate.
Yeah.
And they have got a sample from a creature that was below, and they're going to utilize their knowledge of the oxygen destroyer from the second movie, how that thing almost took out Godzilla, and they're going to make Destroya.
Okay.
Because Destroya in the other movies was created from the blast, the nuclear blast that they used to kill Godzilla, and it created this, like, the species down there, the hermit crabs kind of thing. It created that kind of, like, it kind of devoured everything that oxygen wise. So it's like we're creating that in a more biological way, rather than having them sending a nuke down there and blowing it up and it forming. We're creating it ourselves and send that upon Middle Earth and Skull Island.
Right. That's pretty cool. And then that's when they team up.
At the end of this, I think Kong needs to make a sacrifice in order for Godzilla to defeat Destroya. But Mothra is going to be in this movie because it's going to hatch from the egg.
The egg, right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's my idea for Godzilla and Kong.
I like it because, it felt... I don't know where it's going to go from here with the next movie based on what's already existing.
And, like, none of the other monsters in Godzilla's verse are, like... I mean, I'm sure there's comics that people know about that there's something more powerful, but, like, Destroya, in my mind, he's the only one that could be the cap to this series.
Right. I do really like that tie-in with the oxygen destroyer. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Yeah. We're definitely taking our liberties and not worrying about what the studio might say.
No, they're definitely not going to let us do any of this.
We're making it make sense, and I'm doing, air quotes because it's a monster movie, right. But we're making it about the monsters, and we're trying our best to not tarnish the flow of what has already been established in the first, at least the first movie. Obviously, watching Godzilla and Kong fight, or watching Godzilla and Ghidorah and Rodan and Mothra fight, it's like, that's great. That's why I'm watching these things. I think having the humans in it as kind of a grounding point for us as viewers, I think is okay. But
Well, because they did it in all the
having their
Japanese ones, and the humans
right,
served a purpose, and they weren't irritating. They need
yeah,
to learn to find the balance because Japan did it so
yeah,
well, but now we just
and
have
I think
irritating characters.
right, and I think that the 2014 one did it well too because it's like they had their own things to deal with, and some of their actions had repercussions for turning the fight. You know, it's not 100% up to the humans. Again, it's main characters.
Hmm.
There's too many main characters, and they have too big of a role to play in a movie about monsters fighting.
Right.
Let the monsters fight. Let them do their thing. We'll keep up. They're still there, and I think they still have repercussions. But it's a story about the monsters now. We've already got they set that up for us already.
Yeah.
So now we're like, let's figure out the backstory. Let's get into the lore behind it just a little bit more because that's what we're in for.
Yeah. They don't need a new human story every time to distract us from what they've already been building. But I
Yeah,
understand, like, we have to say, the
right.
studio's slowly realizing that we can have these monsters be the focus of the movie. That's why we're
If I
here.
wanted to watch a
They're
yeah,
on the
like
marquee.
if I, right, it's like I'm not here for a human
Yeah.
drama.
I'm
Like
here for a monster
I'll
drama.
go. Yeah, I'll go watch it somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's okay.
But
Go.
yeah, I have hope for the next one. It's coming out next March, unless it gets delayed, but I doubt it because the filming is already done. They're in post production already.
Amazing.
They started filming last June, they finished in November. So unless they go back and do a couple reshoots, but like principal photography is done. So we're getting that
Amazing.
next March. We have a full year still of post production work, which I think is because we're getting monsters.
Right.
But I'm interested to see where he's going to take, because this might be the last one because the rights issues that Japan might have, because I think they were waiting to extend their contract if Godzilla vs. Kong went well, but then the pandemic happened, so they had to delay it. So that's why Japan gets to do their movie this year. Like they have one coming out in November.
Okay.
But I
I
think
didn't
this might
realize
be the
that.
last one America gets to do for a while.
Right. Okay. Now, is the next like the Japanese one? Is it going to be a Shin Godzilla like they did a couple
I
years
don't
ago?
know. The
Oh,
graphic looks like a Shin Godzilla vibe, but I think it's just like probably a progression from that. I don't know if it's a sequel to Shin. I think it's just another Japanese Godzilla movie. I don't
cool.
know much
I'm
about it.
down
It's
to
supposed to
watch
come
it.
out this November, but
Wow.
that's the MonsterVerse in a nutshell.
It
This was a
is.
long one.
Yeah, and I feel like if we revisit it, and I don't know, 6 or 7 months before the next movie comes out,
Yeah.
and then we talk about the new
I think we should
movie,
do it right after the first trailer drops
that would be a good idea
because we'll have a
because then I'll
synopsis. We
have
have a synopsis now, but I feel like we need that trailer to revisit
yep,
in order to predict what they're going to do and then revisit it after.
exactly. That was fun. That
But
was
yeah,
good.
the disbelief aside, my version of Godzilla vs. Kong could be cool.
Yeah, I
Studios wouldn't
agree.
go for it,
No,
but
but hey, if they're
hey, if you're
interested,
interested, hey,
2 hours on a Sunday at gmail.com.
yeah, shameless plug. We'll get our Top Gun Maverick from Godzilla.
Oh yes,
Shameless plug. It's coming soon. Podcast Top Gun
very
Maverick.
soon.
But
Nice.
yeah,
I'm excited
thank
for
you
that one
everyone
too.
for listening. Do you have any final
Thank
thoughts
you.
before we?
I think I'm good. I really enjoy the idea of the movies. Godzilla 2014 was awesome in my opinion. I can't wait. I'm excited for the next one, despite the rocky, bumpy road that we've
Yeah,
seen for the last two. But it'll still be fun to
yeah,
watch.
I definitely agree.
How about you?
I agree.
Yep.
Yeah, like these movies, I grew up. They're like my babies. I hold the
Yep.
Japanese in high regard, and I want the
Yep.
American ones to be so good because I love Godzilla so much. And
Hmm.
they're close, but then it's just like it makes me sad that no one's sitting in a room like us and just being like, "Oh my god, we can make such great stories, and these human characters can have good backstories, and it all flesh into one." But
Yeah.
hopefully, in the next one, Godzilla and Kong is the quotation untitled version of it in
Yeah.
2024. But hopefully, it's going to be good. We'll be here for that, and we'll continue to bring
Definitely.
movies going forward.
Yay.
So, thank you for listening. We'll see you
Thank
guys
you.
next time.